Hello, everybody. Welcome back on this Saturday night. And, I wanted to talk to you about something that I've just been noticing for a long time and having to deal with. And, it just sort of seems strange that we're dealing with this in today's age, but that is the lack of hard work. I I'm from a small town in Louisiana, and in that small town, I was around men and women who worked hard their entire lives, from my grandfathers who really busted their tails every day. Both of them having several jobs, actually, not just one. My mother's father, he worked as a painter in several different places, and seemed to always work and always be wearing painter's coveralls. And he wasn't just a painter; he was also he worked in a creosote factory. So he smelt of creosote all the time. And then my father's father, he was a carpenter, built houses, and a farmer, and anything else he could do. So then you get to my dad. My dad was a soldier, but he was also a car salesman. He did worked in so many different things. Also a carpenter, and along with my uncle, also a carpenter, built houses, this kind of stuff. And then on my mother's side of the family, all hardworking people, and the women also extremely hardworking. My grandmother, my dad's mom, my grandma Lucille, she used to get up every morning very early to make breakfast for my grandpa and my uncle, and if we were there, for us also, so that he could be out of there by 5 o'clock and on the job site by 6, busting his butt already. And sometimes he came home to have lunch, but she made hot meals every day. I mean, they got at least two hot meals a day. And at lunchtime, they would either eat at the site, or they would come home and eat where she'd have maybe some leftovers from the night before. But usually, it was quite busy. I mean, quite quite a hard work. I remember spending the summers there, and just the atmosphere was a lot of hard work. And then my grandpa would come back home in the evening, and he would take care of the farm if he didn't already take care of it in the morning before he left. And then my mom, Judy, her family, also very hardworking. My grandfather, he he retired working for the Air Force as a carpenter and a general handyman. And then after that, had the farm also. We had a big farm, and with cattle and this kind of stuff, and just hard working. And then my grandmother's also very hardworking people. I mean, gosh, they worked hard. My grandma Bobby, she by the way, it's the anniversary of her passing this week. She was a master seamstress and worked for Jordache, and she was in charge of all the seamstresses that were there. She used to make some great stuff. And then of course my mom's. My mom Linda, she's a full-time nurse, still working 40 hours a week in 3 days. And my mom Judy, she's retired now, but she was a school bus driver and cut hair, and just everything. Hardworking people all around me. And then my brothers and I, we busted our butts working on the farm, working at the house. Summertime's working anything to help out. And then they got to the point where we could start working for money outside of all that. And I remember one of my first jobs was, and I was so proud to have it. I got a job at a place called Mr. Cook's in Tioga, Louisiana. And I used to pull in there, and I was the closing chef at 15 years old. The closing chef, could you imagine that? 15 years old. I don't know if they even give that responsibility to kids anymore, but I'd get in there, and I'd work at least 4 hours at a shot. I think it was every evening I was working, actually. And I would go in there, and then I would take over from the lunch chef, who was basically the full-time chef that was there from the morning up until he was a full-time position. I was a part-time position, just working about 4 hours. Although for a several week period, they had this big revival there, Pentecostal revival, and I was working to midnight every night, or if not later. So I was getting a lot more hours in. But I remember having to go in and making hamburgers and and we had hot dogs, and we had the machines for all that. But the hamburger, I was grilling the hamburgers myself. You had to pre-grill everything, toasters for the bread. You had to have all your sauces, this kind of stuff, ready to go, and your cheese and your lettuce, all that stuff had to be ready to go. And we had a big cooler behind me, so I was passing between them, having to have everything organized. That was the biggest thing. And I think we would put 50 potatoes inside of an oven that would bake, and for the evening crowds also. And I don't think I remember selling very many potatoes, or they didn't. So, but at the end of the day, everything that was a certain time limit over, like the fries or burgers, this kind of stuff. Because what we do is made primarily mostly to order in the evening, because I was able to make them very quickly, but also. And we made a few, but most people, they special ordered their hamburgers. And these were very good hamburgers, by the way. I really enjoyed them. But I didn't get to eat a lot of them there inside the store, because I got there and I worked. And then at the end of the day, we had to throw all the stuff out. I mean, closing time came, and it was a waste. 50 potatoes were in the oven. We threw all those out. And then any hot dogs left over, any burgers left over, any stuff like that was left over, we had to throw it out. And what I would do is, was very... I wasn't stealing, but what I was doing was procuring, instead of wasting all this stuff, I was bringing it home. Not 50 potatoes, no. But I'd bring a couple potatoes home. I mean, and any burgers that were left over, I would take them and put them inside of a bag, and then put that inside the garbage bag, and put it behind in the dumpster, and then I would go. Actually, it was funny because the manager, she didn't have a car, so I would drive her home every night. And so she was this former Air Force officer or something, and she was managing this restaurant. So I would bring her home and then come back by the store, go behind, grab that bag of burgers and stuff, put them in my car, and then drive home. That's what I would do. And then we're talking about maybe 5 or 6 burgers like that, nothing serious. But then we would. Now I wasn't getting home until 10 o'clock at night, so it wasn't like, or 11 o'clock at night. Well, I wasn't getting home early, that's for sure. So it's something that was sort of around, if somebody wanted, they could throw it in the microwave and eat it or whatever. But I did it till the end of the summer, and then sadly I got into a car accident, and then I'd got another job to follow somebody. I don't remember what it was. Man, I tell you, I was busy though. I stayed busy. And we worked these hard jobs, and I went in the Army and stuff. I see these kids today, they're complaining about having to get dirty, or, I tell you, the hardest job I've ever done in my life was not the Army, but was when I was a landscape gardener. That was a hard job. And I did that for almost 2 years. Here in Switzerland, and that was a tough job. That was a very hard job. I mean, I learned a lot. I really enjoyed the being outdoors and stuff, but you don't enjoy it when it's raining, or you don't enjoy it when it starts getting cold out, or it's so hot that you can barely breathe. But I enjoyed it. I enjoyed a lot of it because, I mean, I was mowing a lot of lawns. That was stuff that you did as a kid, but here it's a lot more than just mowing a lawn. It's basically making that place look idealistic. When you leave, it's got to be perfect. And then on top of that, you maintain people's plants, this kind of stuff in their gardens. And then, of course, we had projects where we were putting in walls and putting in terraces, putting in gardens. People, we'd take their old garden out. We would revamping everything, putting in new gardens, putting in stone walls, putting in lots of bushes and this kind of stuff, and hedges, this kind of like that, and it was interesting. It was fun, but it was a hard job, very physical. I mean, we put in a terrace on someone's house. I mean, that's usually, I mean, there's a lot going into that. It's very heavy, very time consuming, very physical, a lot of physical demanding, because you can't always get machines in these places, this kind of stuff. So, but then I see, like I'm saying, I was doing this at 50 years old. But I see these kids today. I mean, it's hard getting them to want to work physical. I remember when I was living before up on the mountains, and we'd get a lot of snow every year, and I just didn't have the time myself to shovel all the snow off our terrace, actually. And sometimes it would get to be 3 feet, 4 feet deep. But I had a couple of boys that lived around me, and they would always do it for money. I would offer them a couple bucks, and they would do it, and they did it happily. They had that spirit in them, that I grew up with, that was formed in me. But when I was managing some businesses, we had apprentices, and some of them were really hardworking kids, but a lot of them were just, it got to where I would ask them, and when I was in the meeting of them, and I met them. I would ask them, "Hey, where do you live? Do you live at home with your parents? Oh, you live home with you and your mom? Okay. Do you make your bed in the morning? Do you clean the toilet? Do you sweep the floor? Do you wash your clothes? This kind of stuff, because you find out most of them didn't want to do that, and so that means that when you have to shop and you need to clean the windows, clean the floors, dust, arrange stuff, put stuff on the shelf correctly, clean the bathroom, make sure everything's in peak condition. They just couldn't do that. They didn't want to do it, and it was crazy. It's crazy just the thought of that. That you have these young kids, and we're talking about not now. We're talking about 15 years ago. This was already happening. So I love that we have computers and this kind of stuff nowadays, but it's hurt a lot of young people when it comes to their work ethics and when it comes to what they're willing to put up with. Like when I was in the Army, I wanted to be there, and it was hard. I mean, but you don't like always having to mop floors and buff floors and clean wall lockers and do beautification, post beautification, pick up garbage, this kind of stuff. But that's part of the mundane business of being a soldier too, because the Army's already paying you, and they're not training you 24/7. Although you're getting paid to work 24/7, but they do give you a little bit of sleep. But they work your butt off. So sure, I mean, I was in the infantry primarily, and stationed in a lot of different locations and a lot of different jobs. But it was work, and I enjoyed it. I loved my primary function, and I liked, I liked being in the field, and I didn't mind the wet so much and the cold. It was just part of it. I mean, probably the worst field exercise I ever had. I've had two really bad field exercises. One was one of the first ones was in Yakima, Washington. So any of y'all have been there, you understand a winter in Yakima, places like Witch's Tit, this kind of place like that. These are some cold places and hard places to be when you get cold, and it just goes right through your boots and your clothes and whatever you're wearing. It's just, it's just not good enough, and, or when you, matter of fact, in 91, before the ground war, well, not the ground war. Yeah. Before the ground war started in Iraq, I was already across the border, and, we had the storm come in. It got really cold and wet. And I mean, everything I had was cold and wet. So, yeah, it was interesting. It was very interesting. And then I remember the second time or the third time, well, second or third time it was really, really hard, was probably one of my last big exercises. We went to JRTC in Louisiana, my home state, about 45 minutes from where I'm from, at Fort Polk, and it rained for 2 weeks. And we were out there, and man, that was bad. The definition of monkey butt had presented itself there. We all had it. It was really bad. But and any of you watching it remember that time. But anyway, it was some tough times. But you know what? It's just character building. You learn from this kind of stuff. You learn, what you're about, and I've never been so hot as I have been in the desert. I've never been so thirsty as I've been in the desert. But I've also never been so cold as I have been in Alaska. But you know what? You make it. You move on. You drive through these things, and in the military, that's part of the job. You man up, or you buck up. But in the civilian world, yeah, sure. I mean, you want to. I go camping even in the bad weather. That doesn't bother me, so much. I just enjoy being in the outdoors, and but so I don't let that. But to get back to work, yeah, it's not easy nowadays. I mean, I meet a lot of these kids here who live on the farms. They have really good work ethics. They're really hard workers. But then you see the kids in the cities. I mean, and they just, gosh, man, they can't get up in the morning, get to Starbucks and get that $10 freaking whatever they drink there. I have no idea. I've never drank a Starbucks coffee. I don't drink coffee. And if they're not, they wake up at 10 o'clock in the afternoon, and get that Starbucks, and then they get on with their day or whatever they're doing. I have no idea, but they complain. It's just too hard for them, Or I remember I'd ask a young lady to do a job for me, and in the end, she said, "Oh, after a month," she said, "Oh, I can't do it because I don't have any time." And then I find out actually that she's had loads of time. She just doesn't have time to work. She's too busy partying and playing. So of course she didn't have time to make a couple of bucks. So anyway, just the way it is. Anyway, so just thought this sort of, I was listening to something else, and it sort of clicked in my head that, we have a pandemic already, but it's a pandemic of laziness, a pandemic of charactership, and it's not our parents' fault. It's our fault. We're the parents of this generation that is growing up lazy, that's growing up unwilling to take to accept responsibility, to take advantage of a situation, to put a little bit of sweat in, and that's a problem. That is a problem. And when I hear, young people complain about these kind of things, I'm like, what the heck are you talking about? I mean, dude, someone's offering you $1, you do it. We're not talking about anything illegal here. We're talking, or anything going against, that's a vice or something like that, or going against your beliefs. We're talking about getting out there and busting your butt and earning $1, And you just won't imagine how many of these kids who's had it so good and still have it so good that they're not willing to invest into themselves this way and put the time in. Of course, because they're too busy playing video games and getting an extra hour of sleep or whatever they're doing, and they're just not taking advantage of it. So anyway, listen, I think this is probably more of a rant than anything else, this video, but if you have any questions, please leave them down in the comments. But I hope you like, share, subscribe, and leave comments. And I look forward to hearing from you what you think about all this. And I'd really appreciate if you could share my videos, get the word out there. And I thought it just sort of something I heard just recently, and I thought I have to put in my 2 bits on this. Let me tell you a real quick story about before I run off here. When I was a young fella, and I wasn't that young, but I guess I was. It was in the summer, and I spent a lot of time with my grandparents because my parents are working, and they were pretty busy also. And also just this is sort of what you did, And my grandfather, my Papa Roy, my dad's dad, he had retired from carpentry, I think. No, he hadn't retired from that yet. No, he was doing that, but on the Saturdays, what he would do is he'd go out and peddle. Peddling is he would sell some of his some extra watermelons that he had grown and vegetables, this kind of stuff. And by the way, that was some hard work growing up. Was working in the fields on the farm, picking watermelon, picking tomatoes, turning watermelon vines. You had to turn them back in on themselves on the rows, this kind of stuff. Hoeing weeds, picking peaches and plums, and picking peas and corn. And I think shucking corn is not that easy, and neither is shelling peas. And I used to get in trouble because it was so boring and I hated doing it, but I did. But you sort of had to do it, especially when you have 10, 15, 20 bushels of peas, and you got to get that stuff canned and ready to go, for the winter, because we fed ourselves on this. This was back in the late 70s and early 90s, even before then. But I remember those times. I remember when Reagan was president and being on the front porch doing this kind of stuff. So, by the way, it was funny because between that time and my first vote was for Reagan. So that's where I was at also. And my whole family were Democrats and I was a Republican. I was already thinking about it, anyway. So, but I was with my grandfather, and we would load the truck up, his old pickup truck, up the day before with cantaloupe and a couple bushel baskets of corn and peas and watermelons, this kind of stuff, mostly watermelons. And we go down to Colfax. It's about a 10-mile drive from where he lives on the Bentley Highway. And so we drive down to Colfax, and first thing we would do. I think there was a place, it was called Big Star. It was when you go in town, you cross over the train tracks to the left. It was a grocery store, and in that it's no longer there, I don't think anymore. But I haven't been there in a long time either. But we'd go in there, and he would get maybe, because usually he always brought his own coffee with him in a thermos. But he would get, like, he'd have that coffee, and then he'd grab me something to drink, like maybe a chocolate milk or something like that. And then he'd get a dozen donuts, glazed donuts. And they were warm. And I remember one morning, we did this one morning, and I ate too many of them, like maybe two. And I got so sick and nauseated because they were so warm. But anyway, we'd do that. And then we'd go into a part of town that was primarily, the primary people living there were the black people. Okay. And a lot of these people were just in, they lived in these little shotgun shacks, and they were just a couple of tiers maybe below us, and we weren't rich at all, and we lived in this, my grandparents had this big old house that they lived in that was, you could see the stars and the sky through, to see the roof, but we weren't rich ourselves, we just happened to lived out in the country and this kind of stuff. But my grandfather, he had a big heart, and he didn't care too much for a lot of the white folk in that town. So he would go, because we weren't rich either, and they sort of, like, those who lived in that town seemed to be uppity, so we'd go into that area, and it had I remember very much the name for it by a lot of the white people, which was pretty bad, and but it was the wrong side of the tracks. But my grandfather, he knew a lot of good people back there, and we'd go back there, and he'd pull up in his truck, probably about 9 o'clock, I would say. The sun was getting up, and it was already hot on a September day, and we would peddle watermelons, this kind of stuff, for almost nothing. I mean, he's probably the only guy I know who'd go into town with a truckload of watermelons. It's probably worth several $100s, and he'd come out with like $9, because he had a tendency to give away a lot. He had a big heart on him, and he was such a good man. And I don't remember him ever making it. I remember him telling my grandma, "Oh, I didn't do too well. I only got about $9 or $10, maybe 15, something like that, But it was better to give it away than let it spoil, because we couldn't eat all those watermelons. We're talking about, probably 80 watermelons. He probably produced maybe 200 watermelons a year. And we'd eat a bunch of them, and we'd give away a bunch of them. And he mostly would had to sign up 80 cents a melon or something like that on the side of the road. And people come by, and they'd pick through and buy melons. And that's where he made most of his money at. And then to keep all this stuff from spoiling, we'd go down into Colfax. And so he would pull that, let the tail of the truck down, and he would sit there and with his knife and his cut open. He had this little bit pocket knife. He'd cut open his watermelons, and he'd just give them out. Let people try them, and all the kids would show up, and then if he knew a family, he would go up. He'd put a little basket together or a bag together, and he had some brown paper bags. He'd put some vegetables in there and some peaches and pears, and go up and practically give away. I mean, every once in a while he would get couple of cents, I remember he used to say, ain't worth nothing, a couple of bits. He spoke in bits, when it come to money. And if you know what a bit is about 12 and a half cents. So 2 bits, 4 bits, 6 bits, $1, so that's how it sort of went. So 8 bits was $1. And he spoke primarily in bits, and he didn't make more than a few bits on anything, because he just wasn't out there to rob people. And he was a very humble man. And he just enjoyed, I think, primarily just seeing people, saying hello, shaking hands, and just being a nice guy and being a Christian man, because he was very much a Christian man with a horde background. He was a drinker when he was younger, but he was a damn good man, actually, and a hard-working man. And that was my summers back with them when I wasn't helping on job sites, helping them build this kind of stuff. I didn't do a whole lot, I was very young at that time, but it was some good old days. But so that's where probably a lot of my characters is from him, my dad, and my uncle, and of course the other side of the family also. There's a lot of characters there also. My grandpa Mahfouz, Fred Mahfouz, he was he was a character also. He just avoided being around anybody else. He did his own thing. He'd smoke his rolled cigarettes also, and be out tinkering around in the yard, in the garage. And I remember he used to have these. He gotten himself a a refrigerator, a couple of refrigerators, that these old school ones, ones that were all aluminum or metal on the inside. And he would take those and get all the plastic out of them, and then he'd put all the racks into them. At that time, all the racks were all metal and this kind of stuff, not unlike the plastic see-through stuff we see today. And he would make a barbecue pit out of it. He had this huge refrigerator. He could do 100 hamburgers in one shot, and the family was pretty big. So, he had 6 kids himself, he and my grandmother. And then, of course, all the friends would come over, and then all the war stories would come out between all the guys and this kind of stuff. It was interesting. But, interesting stuff. Anyway, I got some more stories to tell, but this video is getting long-toothed now, so it's about 25 minutes. And someone told me, was it Baden Powell said that if a preacher preached more than 10 minutes, then he'd take him out back and whip his backside. So I'm already well past the backside whipping part of this video. But anyway, I hope you all have a good one. And like I said, remember to like, share, subscribe, and leave a comment. And I hope to hear back again from you soon. Bye.